In a previous video, we looked at why British houses overheat and ways to stop the house becoming an unintentional sauna. Block the sun, ideally outside the house, move air to increase comfort, dump heat from the house when it's hotter inside than out, and reduce the heat you generate inside the house. This video will look at ways to cool the person. We know intuitively that a fan cools the person, but why does it work? There are two mechanisms. I'm going to start with the least important of the two because it's a bit simpler and a lot of the same concepts apply to the other one. Newton's law of cooling tells us that the rate at which a body cools is directly proportional to the excess temperature above the surroundings under condition of forced convection. It's an approximation, but it does well enough for our purposes here. So proportional to the excess temperature, we'll cool a lot in cold air, but not so much when the air around us is hot. Fine, makes sense. But the forced convection bit, what's that about? It means that when there's a forced airflow, like when you're sitting in some kind of breeze, natural or artificial. Why is forced convection important? Without forced convection, the air next to the skin is warmed by the skin, then slowly rises and is replaced. While this is happening, it acts as a kind of buffer between your skin and the cooler air outside this layer. Remember what we said before about the rate of loss of heat being proportional to the excess temperature? While that buffer layer is there, there's less of a temperature difference between the skin and the air next to it than there is if it's instantly replaced by cool air. So the skin loses more heat by convection when there's a breeze. But a moment ago I told you this is the least important of the two methods that we're discussing. You'll know that the human body has its own way of cooling by sweating. This leaves water on the skin, which then evaporates. Evaporation requires energy to overcome the latent heat of vaporization. And so this cools the body. And again, this works best when there's a breeze, natural or artificial. What's latent heat of vaporization? Well, this is best explained by first thinking about its related concept, the latent heat of fusion. Nothing to do with the fusion that happens in the sun. This is a fancy name for the energy that's needed to change a solid into a liquid. You probably did this in science practical back in your school days. You put ice in a water in a beaker and then you measure the temperature every minute or so. You find that the temperature stays at or very close to 0 Celsius while the ice melts, then goes up as it absorbs heat from the surroundings. But why doesn't the temperature increase while the ice is melting? Well, it is absorbing heat from the surroundings both during and after melting. But while the ice is melting, energy from the water is being used to overcome the latent heat of fusion. Once this is done, then all the absorbed energy increases the temperature instead. Back to our evaporation. Just as the water needs energy to change from solid ice into liquid water, it also needs energy to change from liquid water into water vapour. But why then do we need forced convection for this mechanism? Well, again, we have a boundary layer problem. Sweat evaporates into the thin layer of air next to the skin. That layer quickly gets saturated with water vapour and can't accept much more. The vapour pressure at the skin surface and in the boundary layer air equalises and evaporation slows almost to a stop. Don't worry too much about the vapour pressure, but just quickly, when there's a lot of water in the air, then the water molecules coming from the skin are balanced out by water molecules going the other way. So net evaporation is 0. On the other hand, when the air is dry, then the vapour pressure is well below that saturation level. So evaporation happens and heat is carried away with it. And the best way to make sure that dry air is next to the skin? Have some kind of breeze move that dry air next to the skin and the moisture away. A bigger difference in the vapour pressure gives faster evaporation and more heat loss. By analogy, imagine people in a conference room during the interval. When there's loads of people in the room, some may spill out into a breakout area. If the breakout area is just as busy, there's no incentive for people to leave the main room, unless that's where the refreshments are. So imagine the people in the second room all left. That might entice others to go out there and use the space. Back to the water. Remove the humid air next to the skin and more evaporation will take place, cooling the skin. You may have heard of wet bulb temperature. This is the temperature a wet thermometer bulb can reach due to the evaporative effect. If the air is dry, the water evaporates and cools the thermometer. If the air is humid, it doesn't. I might do a separate video on this at some point and talk about relative humidity and hygrometers. But for now, ever got out of a pool and been colder when you're hunting for a towel than you were in the pool? That's because evaporating water is cooling your skin. So we spoke a bit about fans blowing over the skin, cooling us down. This doesn't work at all when there's no moisture to evaporate off and the moving air is the same temperature as the surfaces it moves across. So don't leave a fan going if there's no one there to feel the breeze. It's a waste of money and that motor is heating the room. Similarly, the fan works best when there's lots of skin surface for it to blow over. That's why stripping off in front of the fan helps cool you so quickly. And to get the evaporation effect, you need wet skin. This doesn't have to be from sweat. You can use a spray bottle or similar, wipe your skin with a wet flannel, or take a shower and don't obsess about drying yourself completely. If you take this route, by the way, you might be better taking a lukewarm shower than a really cold shower. A cold shower can contract the blood vessels right next to the skin and actually slow your cooling. On the subject of blood vessels, rinsing the forearms or dipping the feet in cool water up to your ankles can help cool you. The veins in the lower limbs are close to the skin and can lose heat by conduction to the cool water. We talked about shade when we were discussing our homes, but now let's look at the effect on the person. You don't need me to tell you that sitting in the shade is cooler than being in the sun, but the difference is huge. So much so that if you must sit in the sun, it's generally better to cover your skin with long clothing and hats. And I'm only talking about from a temperature management point of view, not about the risk of UV light on the skin, which is a whole topic in itself. If that shade allows airflow over your skin, so much the better for reasons we've already discussed. So think parasols, sunshades and loose clothing, and avoid being in the sun during the hottest part of the day when the sun's overhead. This is obvious but crucial, so it's worth repeating here. Do any strenuous tasks early or late. If you are out in the heat walking, then at least slow down. And don't sit in the sun on a hot day and expect a cold drink or a fan to solve everything. Talking of drinks, remember the body needs water to sweat, so dehydration compromises the body's ability to thermoregulate. Make drinks easily available and make sure you drink before you're thirsty. Use squash or soft drinks if people don't want to drink plain water. Ice can also be used to make drinks more inviting. Finally, let's touch on nighttime cooling. A hot, sleepless night ruins your recovery and so makes the next day harder. Think about changing where you sleep. A downstairs room might be cooler. Use light bedding. Consider a fan if the heat is unbearable. Some are quite quiet on a low setting. Have water by the bed. Take a cool but not cold shower before turning in. And if the outside air is cooler, consider opening the window. The next video in this series will move on to more practical elements of cooling the room and will need a lot of the same concepts. So I hope you're at least half paying attention to the physics. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to our next video.